"You're done here, rookie. Clean out your desk." Police Chief Harold Davis's voice thundered through the station as he pointed a firm finger at Lily Carter. Gasps filled the room. Officers exchanged wide-eyed glances, frozen in their spots. No one could believe what was happening. Lily, her face pale but determined, grabbed her badge and stared back at the chief. "Chief Davis, I may not fit your expectations, but I'm not leaving this unsolved. You've caused enough trouble. This case isn't for amateurs." The chief slammed a stack of papers on his desk. "You're off the force." With that, the rookie walked out, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. But as the station door closed behind her, no one knew Lily's next move would leave them speechless. 3 weeks earlier, Lily Carter's first day at Willow Creek Police Department had been anything but smooth. A tall, young woman with bright hazel eyes and a slight frame, she had always dreamed of being a cop. Her mom used to call her Detective Lily whenever she'd solved neighborhood mysteries as a kid, whether it was finding Mrs. Hanson's lost cat or figuring out who stole the cookies from the church bake sale. But Willow Creek wasn't a place for dreamers. It was a quiet town on the surface, known for its pumpkin festivals and cozy diners. Beneath it all, though, was a darkness no one spoke about. Recently, a string of burglaries had left the community on edge. For weeks, local businesses were broken into, their safes emptied. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no leads. When Lily arrived, she thought she'd be part of a team solving these crimes. Instead, she found herself stuck with mundane tasks, fetching coffee and filing reports. Rookie duties, the senior officers called it. Chief Davis, an imposing man with graying hair and a booming voice, didn't hide his doubts about her. "You're too soft, Carter. Policing isn't about playing nice." Still, Lily refused to be discouraged. She spent her lunch breaks studying old case files and getting to know the town. She discovered that Willow Creek's people, though cautious, had stories to tell if someone cared to listen. One day, as she grabbed a sandwich at Lucy's diner, an older man named Joe struck up a conversation. "You're the new cop, huh?" he said, his eyes twinkling under thick glasses. "Yes, sir," Lily replied, smiling. "I'm trying to help where I can." Joe leaned closer. "Help, huh? You ever wonder why they can't catch that thief? Maybe they're looking in the wrong place." Before Lily could ask more, Joe winked and left, his cane tapping on the floor. His words stuck with her. Was the department overlooking something? That night, Lily stayed late at the station, combing through every burglary report. Patterns emerged. The thief only struck businesses near Willow Creek's riverfront, and the break-ins always happened during heavy rain. It seemed small, but Lily's gut told her it mattered. The next morning, she approached Chief Davis with her findings. "Chief, I think I've spotted a pattern," she began. Davis barely looked up from his coffee. "Rookie, we've got seasoned detectives on this. Leave the big stuff to them." "But..." "No buts. Go sort the evidence logs." Dejected but not defeated, Lily decided to investigate on her own. She began visiting the crime scenes after hours, speaking with business owners, and observing the riverfront. She noticed unusual tire marks near one of the shops that had been hit. The tracks led to a narrow dirt road, hidden behind overgrown bushes. Lily took photos and brought them to Davis, hoping he'd listen this time. Instead, he exploded. "You're out of line, Carter. This is exactly why rookies don't lead cases. You don't follow orders." "But Chief, no excuses. One more step out of line, and you're out of here." Humiliated, Lily returned to her desk, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. Some officers smirked, but a few looked sympathetic. One of them, Officer Ben Harper, quietly slid her a coffee. "You've got guts, Carter. Don't let the chief crush that." Despite the encouragement, Lily felt lost. She thought about giving up. Then, one rainy evening, as she walked along the riverfront, she saw something that made her heart race. A shadowy figure loading a large bag into the trunk of a car parked on the dirt road she discovered earlier. Lily quickly snapped a photo with her phone, but before she could get closer, the car sped away. She rushed to the station, ready to share her discovery, but Chief Davis didn't want to hear it. "You're seeing things, Carter. Stick to your job or find another one." Lily clenched her fists. "Fine," she said quietly. If you won't act, I will. And she did. That night, Lily began piecing together her own investigation, determined to prove herself, even if it meant risking her job. 2 days later, the chief made good on his threat. When Lily tried to share her progress once more, he cut her off. "You're done here, rookie," he declared. "This department doesn't need loose cannons." Lily left the station that day feeling crushed. But deep down, she knew she wasn't finished. If no one else believed in her, she'd have to believe in herself. Now, Lily stood outside the station, her badge in her pocket and her determination stronger than ever. She had a lead, a suspect, and a growing trail of clues. All she needed was one more breakthrough to solve the case. As the rain began to fall, she whispered to herself, "You've got this, Lily. Don't stop now." And with that, she disappeared into the night, ready to uncover the truth. What she didn't know was that her next step would change everything, forever. The rain poured harder as Lily walked along the dimly lit streets of Willow Creek. Her coat did little to shield her from the cold, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing. She had been dismissed, humiliated in front of her peers, and left to fend for herself. Yet, for the first time, she felt free. She didn't have to worry about orders or proving herself to Chief Davis. This time, she could do things her way. The shadowy figure she'd seen loading the car near the riverfront replayed in her mind like a movie on loop. Their movements had been hurried, almost panicked, as though they knew they were being watched. Lily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from Joe, the old man she'd met at Lucy's diner. "If you're serious about helping, meet me at the old mill. Midnight. Come alone." Lily's heart skipped a beat. The old mill was a run-down building on the outskirts of town. It hadn't been in use for decades, but it was a local landmark. Why would Joe want to meet there? And why at midnight? She hesitated for a moment, but then reminded herself of the promise she'd made. She wasn't going to stop, no matter what. By the time Lily reached the mill, the rain had turned the dirt road into a muddy mess. She parked her car a few yards away and approached cautiously. The mill stood like a ghost in the dark, its broken windows and rusted machinery barely visible under the faint moonlight. She spotted a flicker of light inside. Joe must already be here. Lily pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. The smell of damp wood and rust filled the air. Joe sat on a makeshift stool, a lantern casting shadows across his weathered face. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Joe," Lily said, her voice steady despite the eerie atmosphere. "What's this about?" Joe gestured for her to sit on an overturned crate. "I've been around a long time, kid. Seen things people wouldn't believe. This town's got secrets, and if you're not careful, they'll swallow you whole." Lily crossed her arms. "I'm not afraid of secrets. What do you know about the burglaries?" Joe leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's not just burglaries. It's bigger than that. You ever wonder why the police aren't making progress? Why they don't want you digging too deep?" Lily frowned. "What are you saying?" "There's someone on the inside," Joe said quietly. "Someone helping the thief." Lily's breath caught. An accomplice in the department? It sounded impossible, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The clean getaways, the lack of evidence, the chief's unwillingness to listen. It all lined up. "Do you have proof?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Joe shook his head. "Not yet, but I've been watching. That car you saw by the riverfront? It's been here before. Always late at night, always during storms." Lily leaned closer. "Do you know whose car it is?" Joe hesitated, then nodded. "It belongs to someone you know. Someone you trust." Before Lily could press him further, a loud crash echoed through the mill. She shot to her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for the badge that was no longer pinned to her chest. The sound came again, louder this time, like heavy boots stomping on the wooden floor above. "Who's there?" Lily called, her voice firm. No response. Joe grabbed the lantern and motioned for her to follow. "Stay close, kid. This place isn't safe." They moved cautiously toward the staircase leading to the upper level. The creaking steps seemed to scream with every step they took. As they reached the top, the faint beam of a flashlight flickered ahead. Someone was definitely here. Lily whispered, "Joe, stay back." I'll handle this. Before he could protest, she stepped forward, her heart pounding. The figure turned toward her, and for a brief moment, their face was illuminated. It wasn't someone she recognized, but what they held in their hand made her blood run cold. A crowbar. The figure lunged, and Lily barely dodged in time. The crowbar smashed into a nearby beam, splintering the wood. "Joe, run!" she shouted, grabbing a broken plank to defend herself. Joe hesitated, but then bolted down the stairs. Lily swung the plank, narrowly missing her attacker. The figure growled in frustration and charged again. Lily ducked, her instincts taking over. She tripped the attacker, sending them crashing to the floor. She didn't wait to see if they'd get up. Grabbing the lantern Joe had left behind, she ran. The sound of footsteps behind her was growing fainter, but she didn't stop until she was outside. Joe was already in her car, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his seatbelt. Lily jumped in the driver's seat and peeled away from the mill. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wheel. "Joe, who was that?" Joe shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever it was, they didn't want us finding out the truth." Lily's mind raced. Someone had gone to great lengths to scare them off, and it wasn't just a random thug. This was personal. Whoever was behind the burglaries knew she was close to uncovering the truth, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop her. As they reached the edge of town, Joe turned to her. "You're in over your head, kid. Are you sure you want to keep going?" Lily tightened her grip on the wheel. "I don't have a choice. If I stop now, they win. And I can't let that happen." Joe nodded slowly. "Then you'd better be ready. Things are about to get a whole lot worse." Lily dropped Joe off at his small apartment and drove home, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Who was the figure at the mill? What secrets was the chief hiding? And most importantly, who on the force could she trust? As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo attachment. She opened it, and her heart sank. It was a picture of her at the mill, taken from the shadows. The message beneath it read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Lily stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Someone was watching her. But instead of fear, a spark of determination flared in her chest. If they thought a threat would scare her off, they were wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Lily stared at the threatening message on her phone, her mind reeling. Someone was watching her, tracking her every move. The photo was too clear to be a coincidence. It had been taken while she was inside the mill. Whoever sent it knew she was getting too close, and they wanted her to stop. But giving up wasn't an option. That night, sleep was impossible. She paced her small living room, her thoughts racing. There was no one she could trust. Not at the department, not in town. Even Joe, as helpful as he had been, might be keeping secrets. The weight of it all bore down on her, but it didn't crush her. It ignited her. The next morning, Lily sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and began organizing her thoughts. She listed everything she knew so far. The burglaries were centered around businesses near the riverfront. The thief always struck during storms. Someone in the police department might be helping them. Joe mentioned the car she saw belonged to someone she trusted. Someone was following her and had tried to scare her off at the mill. Her phone buzzed again, making her jump. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was Joe. "I've been thinking," Joe said, his voice low. "There's someone you need to talk to. A guy named Eddie. He works at the scrapyard on the outskirts of town. He knows things, hears things. He might have seen that car you're talking about. Why didn't you tell me this before?" Lily asked. "I wasn't sure you were ready," Joe admitted. "But after last night, I'd say you're ready for anything." Lily wasn't so sure about that, but she didn't have a better lead. "Thanks, Joe. I'll check it out." She arrived at the scrapyard an hour later. The place was a chaotic mess of rusted car parts, towering piles of metal, and the occasional stray cat. A skinny man in a grease-stained hoodie leaned against a beat-up pickup truck, smoking a cigarette. He looked up as Lily approached, his sharp eyes sizing her up. "You Eddie?" she asked. "Depends. Who's asking?" "Lily Carter. I'm trying to solve these burglaries happening around town. Heard you might know something." Eddie smirked. "And why would I tell you anything? You're not even a cop anymore." Lily felt a pang of frustration but kept her voice steady. Because someone's hurting this town, and I think you want it to stop as much as I do. Eddie flicked his cigarette to the ground and studied her for a moment. All right, Carter. I'll bite. I've seen a car parked near the riverfront a couple of times. Fancy one, too. Black sedan, tinted windows, real clean. Doesn't fit around here, you know? But here's the kicker. I saw it drive into the woods behind the old cannery last week. The cannery? Lily asked, frowning. That place has been abandoned for years. Exactly, Eddie said. But if you ask me, something's going on there. Weird noises at night. Lights sometimes. Ain't natural. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. The cannery was a perfect hideout. Isolated, forgotten, and big enough to store stolen goods. Thanks, Eddie. This helps a lot. Just be careful, Eddie said, his voice dropping. Whoever's behind this, they don't play nice. Lily spent the afternoon preparing to check out the cannery. She packed a flashlight, a notebook, and her old police-issued taser. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the sun set, she parked her car a safe distance away and approached the building on foot. The cannery loomed in the darkness, its metal walls streaked with rust and its windows shattered. The place reeked of decay, but Lily's instincts told her she was in the right place. She circled the building, looking for any signs of activity. Then she saw it, a faint glow coming from one of the windows. Carefully, she climbed through a broken side door and entered the building. The inside was even worse than the outside. Rusted machinery and crumbling walls created a maze of shadows. She followed the light, her footsteps muffled by years of dust and grime. As she turned a corner, she froze. Voices. Move the stuff to the van. We're not sticking around after last night. Lily peeked around the corner and saw two men loading crates into a van. She couldn't make out their faces, but their hurried movements told her they were nervous. Her heart pounded as she pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos. But then, her foot slipped on a loose piece of metal, and the noise echoed through the room. The men froze. One of them turned, his face partially illuminated by the dim light. Who's there? Lily's stomach sank. She tried to retreat, but before she could move, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. She struggled, her flashlight dropping to the floor and rolling away. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the van's headlights turning on, the engine roaring to life. Lily woke up groggy and disoriented, her hands tied behind her back. She was in a small, dimly lit room, the sound of rain echoing off the metal walls. She realized she was still in the cannery, but she had no idea how long she'd been unconscious. A voice cut through the silence. You should have stayed out of this, Carter. She looked up and saw one of the men from earlier standing in the doorway. His face was shadowed, but his voice was cold and menacing. You don't know what you're messing with, he continued. This isn't about a few burglaries. This is bigger than you. Lily glared at him, her mind racing for a way out. If it's so big, why are you afraid of one rookie cop? The man chuckled darkly. You think this is a game? Let me show you how serious this is. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Lily's heart stopped when he turned the screen toward her. It was a live feed of her house. A car was parked outside, its headlights shining through the rain. If you don't back off, the man said, his voice dripping with threat, your little investigation won't be the only thing that ends. Lily's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to let them scare her. Not now. Not ever. This wasn't over. Not even close. Lily's mind raced as she stared at the live feed of her house. The car outside, headlights glaring through the rain, was no accident. They were making it clear that her actions weren't just a personal risk, they threatened the people she cared about. The man standing in the doorway smirked as he slid the phone back into his pocket. You're bold, Carter. I'll give you that. But bravery doesn't get you far in this game. Lily sat up straighter, ignoring the ache in her head and the rope biting into her wrists. You don't scare me, she said, her voice steady. If you're so powerful, why are you worried about what I might find? The man's smirk faltered. He stepped closer, crouching down so his face was level with hers. It's not what you might find, Carter. It's what you've already found. His words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She hadn't thought she was that close. Her work had felt like following breadcrumbs, but maybe she was closer to the truth than she realized. She held his gaze, refusing to let him see her fear. "You're sloppy," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You leave a trail of breadcrumbs so obvious, even a rookie can find you. I'm not afraid of you. You're afraid of me." For a moment, the man's composure cracked. He stood abruptly, his jaw tightening. "Stay here. I need to make a call." He turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound of a lock clicking into place echoed in the small space. Lily didn't waste a second. She twisted her wrists against the ropes, wincing as they cut into her skin. The knots were tight, but they weren't perfect. Slowly, she felt them start to loosen. The sound of voices outside the room grew louder. She could hear the man arguing with someone, his tone sharp and agitated. The distraction was enough for Lily to free one of her hands. She quickly untied the rest of the ropes, her muscles screaming in protest as she stretched her arms. She needed a plan. The room was nearly empty, but her flashlight lay on the floor where it had rolled earlier. She grabbed it, her mind racing. She had no weapon, no backup, and no idea how many people were involved. But she had her wits, and right now, that would have to be enough. Lily crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. The man was still on the phone, his voice tense. "She knows too much. No, I don't care what the chief says. We can't take that risk anymore." Lily's breath caught. The chief. Was Davis involved in this? The pieces started falling into place, and a sickening realization hit her. The chief wasn't just dismissive of her investigation. He was actively protecting someone, maybe even working with them. She couldn't afford to think about it now. She needed to get out. The lock on the door was old and rusty. She grabbed the metal casing of the flashlight and began working at the screws, praying the noise wouldn't draw attention. After what felt like an eternity, the lock gave way, and the door creaked open. Lily peered into the dimly lit hallway. The man was standing at the far end, his back to her, still arguing into his phone. She crouched low and moved silently, her heart pounding with every step. When she was close enough, she held her breath and made her move. With all the strength she could muster, she swung the flashlight at the back of his head. It connected with a sickening thud, and the man crumpled to the floor. Lily grabbed his phone and bolted down the hallway. She could hear shouts behind her, but she didn't stop. She burst through the side door she had entered earlier and sprinted into the rain-soaked night. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow down until she was deep into the woods. When she finally stopped, she leaned against a tree, gasping for air. She looked down at the phone in her hand and quickly swiped through it. Most of the messages and call logs were encrypted, but one thread stood out, a series of texts between the man and someone labeled HD. The messages were brief, but they confirmed everything. "The rookie's getting close. Keep her busy. I'll deal with her if she doesn't back off. Make sure the goods are moved before the next storm." HD could only be one person. Harold Davis, the chief. Lily's stomach churned. The man she had looked up to, the one who had dismissed her as soft and inexperienced, was the mastermind behind it all. He wasn't just ignoring the burglaries, he was orchestrating them. The sound of footsteps in the distance snapped her out of her thoughts. She shoved the phone into her pocket and started running again. She couldn't go home. They were watching her house. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't expect her to go. Then it hit her, Lucy's diner. Joe would be there, and if anyone could help her now, it was him. The lights of the diner were a beacon in the dark as Lily stumbled inside, soaked to the bone. Joe was sitting in his usual booth, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening when he saw her state. "Kid, what happened?" he asked, standing up. Lily collapsed into the booth, her hands trembling as she pulled out the phone. "Joe, you were right. The chief, he's behind everything. I have proof." Joe's face darkened. "Let me see." Lily handed him the phone and watched as he scrolled through the messages. His expression grew grimmer with each passing second. "This is bad, Lily," he said finally. "Real bad. If Davis is involved, you're not just dealing with thieves. You're dealing with an entire operation." "I need to get this to someone outside the department," Lily said. Someone who can stop this. Joe nodded. I know a guy. A retired detective from the state police. He's clean, and he hates corruption. I'll call him. As Joe pulled out his phone, Lily leaned back in the booth, exhaustion washing over her. She had taken a major step forward, but she knew the fight was far from over. The sound of a car screeching to a stop outside the diner snapped her back to reality. Her heart sank as she saw two shadowy figures step out, their faces obscured by the rain. They were coming for her. Joe, she whispered, her voice trembling. They found me. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered slightly as the two shadowy figures stepped through the rain and approached the entrance. Lily's pulse raced. The cozy diner that had always felt safe now seemed suffocating, its glass walls and bright lights leaving her exposed. Joe looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing when he saw her pale face. Lily, what's... They're here, she whispered, cutting him off. Two men. Outside. Joe glanced toward the windows, his jaw tightening as he caught sight of the figures. He slipped his phone into his pocket and leaned closer. Listen to me, kid. Stay calm. They can't do anything in public. Lily's gut told her otherwise. These men were bold enough to corner her in the cannery, to leave threats outside her house. A crowded diner might slow them down, but it wouldn't stop them. The bell above the door jingled as the men entered. Both were dressed in dark jackets, their faces shadowed by baseball caps. They scanned the room, and Lily knew the second they spotted her. One nudged the other, and they began walking toward her booth. Joe stood, his hands on the table, his weathered face calm but firm. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying an edge, can I help you? The taller of the two stopped in front of the booth, his eyes flicking from Joe to Lily. We're here to have a word with her, he said, his voice low and cold. Private conversation. Joe didn't budge. This isn't the place for private anything. You want to chat? Wait until morning. The second man, stockier and with a sneer etched across his face, stepped closer. We're not asking. Lily's hands tightened into fists beneath the table. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave Joe to handle this alone. I don't know who you are, Joe said, his tone steady, but you've got two options. Walk out of here, or I call every trucker I know to make sure you don't. The taller man chuckled, his hand moving to his jacket pocket. Bold talk for an old man. Lily's heart lurched. She couldn't let this escalate. She stood abruptly, her voice louder than she intended. Fine, let's talk. Joe looked at her sharply, but she gave him a small shake of her head, silently pleading with him to trust her. The taller man smiled faintly and stepped back. Smart choice. Lily followed them toward the door, the weight of their presence making her every step feel heavier. As they stepped outside, the cold rain hit her face, grounding her. She couldn't let fear take over. She had to stay sharp. The men led her to the side of the diner, away from the windows. One stood in front of her, the other behind, effectively boxing her in. The taller one crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Here's the deal, he said. You're going to stop digging. You're going to leave town. Tonight. Lily forced herself to meet his gaze. And if I don't? The stockier man smirked. If you don't, that cozy little house of yours? It might not be so cozy anymore. And your friend inside? He might not be so lucky next time. Anger flared in Lily's chest, cutting through her fear. You think you can intimidate me? You've already shown your hand. I know who you work for, and I have proof. The taller man's face darkened. What proof? Lily hesitated. She didn't want to reveal what she had, but the bluff could buy her time. Enough to bury your boss and everyone involved. For a split second, uncertainty flashed across his face. Then his expression hardened. You're lying. Try me, Lily said, her voice steady. You hurt me, and that proof goes straight to the state police. You touch my house, my friends, anything, and it's over. The stockier man stepped closer, his sneer gone, replaced by something more dangerous. You don't know what you're dealing with, little girl. Before Lily could respond, the door to the diner slammed open. Joe stepped out, a shotgun in his hands, aimed squarely at the taller man. She told you to back off. Now's your chance to listen. The men froze, their bravado faltering. The taller one glanced at his partner, then at Joe. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Joe said, cocking the shotgun. "Get out of here." Without another word, the two men backed away, disappearing into the rain. Lily let out a shaky breath, her legs trembling. Joe lowered the shotgun but kept his eyes on the road, making sure they didn't come back. "You okay, kid?" he asked. Lily nodded, though her voice was unsteady. "Thanks, Joe." Don't thank me yet," he interrupted. "They're scared now, but they'll regroup. And next time, they'll come harder." Lily knew he was right. Her chest tightened as the weight of the situation settled over her. She wasn't just fighting a few petty criminals. This was an organized operation, and she had just made herself their biggest target. "We need to act fast," she said. "Did you reach your contact?" Joe nodded. "He's on his way. But if you've got proof, you need to keep it safe. They'll do whatever it takes to destroy it." Lily pulled the stolen phone from her pocket. "This is the key. I just need to unlock it." Joe frowned. "That's not going to be easy. These guys don't use basic security." "I'll figure it out," Lily said, determination hardening her voice. "I have to." Joe studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're not doing this alone. If they want to fight, they've got one." Lily managed a small, grateful smile. She wasn't sure how this would end, but one thing was clear. She wasn't backing down. As they re-entered the diner, Lily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her stomach dropped. A single message lit up the screen. "You've made your choice. Now face the consequences." Before she could react, a loud explosion shattered the night. She whipped around just in time to see flames erupting in the distance. Her house. Lily's heart sank as she realized the full extent of what she was up against. The stakes had just been raised, and this was no longer just about justice. This was personal. The flames lit up the night sky, visible even from miles away. Lily's chest tightened, a mix of panic and fury surging through her. She bolted toward Joe's truck, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Lily, wait," Joe called, following close behind. "You can't go charging in. It might not be safe." "They burned my house, Joe," she snapped, spinning around to face him. Her eyes burned, not from the fire, but from the sting of betrayal. "They're sending a message. I can't just stand here and let them think I'm scared." Joe placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Kid, I know you're angry, but if you go rushing into this, they'll win. We need a plan." Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. He was right. Charging into danger without a plan would only get her killed. She nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Let's go, but carefully." Joe handed her the keys to his truck. "You drive. I'll call my contact. If anyone can help us right now, it's him." The truck skidded to a stop a few blocks from Lily's house. She could feel the heat of the fire even from here, the acrid smell of smoke stinging her nose. Firefighters were already on the scene, their hoses spraying torrents of water onto the blazing inferno. Neighbors stood on their lawns, murmuring in shock, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Lily's throat tightened as she took in the scene. Her home, the place she'd worked so hard to build for herself, was gone. But the fear that gripped her heart wasn't for her belongings. It was for the evidence she'd hidden there. The thumb drive she'd backed up her notes and findings on had been tucked away in a drawer in her bedroom. There was no way it had survived the fire. "This wasn't random," she muttered, her voice hard. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Joe glanced at her from the passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear. "Stay calm, kid. We'll rebuild. And if I know you, you've got backups." She nodded, though her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She had one more copy of her findings on a secure cloud account. The stolen phone in her pocket still held the most damning evidence. But now that the men knew she had it, they wouldn't stop coming after her. Joe hung up his phone. "My contact's on his way. He says we can lay low at his cabin in the woods. It's off the grid. No one will find us there." Lily's instinct was to argue, to stay and face her enemies head-on. But the fire was proof that she wasn't just up against common criminals. These people were ruthless, and she needed time to regroup. "All right," she said. "Let's go." An hour later, Lily and Joe pulled up to a secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was small but sturdy, with reinforced doors and solar panels on the roof. Joe's contact, a grizzled man named Frank, met them on the porch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running across his cheek and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Lily," Frank said, extending a calloused hand. "Joe's told me a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Lily replied, shaking his hand. Frank chuckled. "Mostly. Let's get you inside. You've got a fight ahead of you." The cabin was sparsely furnished but functional. Maps and case files covered the walls, and a computer sat on a desk in the corner. Frank gestured for Lily to sit while he and Joe started a pot of coffee. "Joe filled me in on your situation," Frank said as he poured 3 steaming mugs. "Sounds like you've got some powerful enemies." Lily nodded, pulling the stolen phone from her pocket. "This is the key to everything. It has messages proving that Chief Davis is involved, but it's encrypted. I can't get past the security." Frank took the phone, his brow furrowing as he examined it. "I've got tools that might crack this, but it'll take time, and once we break in, they might know." Lily's jaw tightened. "Then we need to be ready. If they come for us, we fight back." Frank gave her a sharp nod. "I like your style, kid." The next few hours passed in tense silence as Frank worked on the phone. Lily paced the cabin, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of the fire, the smug faces of the men who had threatened her, and the sinking realization that Davis had betrayed her. He had always dismissed her as too soft, but now she understood. It wasn't her inexperience that bothered him. It was her determination. Joe sat at the table, cleaning his shotgun. "You're awfully quiet," he said, glancing up at her. "I'm thinking," Lily replied, "about how to end this." "You've got guts, Carter," Joe said with a small smile. "And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You're doing the right thing." Before Lily could respond, Frank let out a triumphant grunt. "I'm in." Lily rushed to his side, her heart pounding as she peered at the phone screen. Frank had cracked the encryption, and a string of messages and files appeared. There were addresses, transaction records, and even photos of stolen goods. But the most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages between Chief Davis and someone labeled Boss. One message stood out. "The rookie's digging too deep. Take care of it before it becomes a problem." Lily's stomach churned. This was it, the proof she needed to take Davis down. But before she could celebrate, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached her ears. She froze, her heart pounding as headlights cut through the trees. "Looks like they found us," Frank said, grabbing a rifle from the wall. Joe cocked his shotgun. "Lily, stay behind us. We'll handle this." Lily shook her head. "No, this ends tonight." She grabbed the phone, her resolve hardening. The fight was coming to her doorstep, but she wasn't running anymore. It was time to stand her ground. Lily crouched near the window, her heart pounding as she counted 3 vehicles pulling into the clearing in front of the cabin. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the damp forest floor. Shadows moved inside the vehicles before the doors swung open. Men stepped out, armed, confident, and deadly. Joe peered through the blinds, his shotgun ready. 6 of them, maybe more. They came heavy. Frank stood by the table, calmly checking the scope on his rifle. "They'll assume we're outnumbered. That's their first mistake." Lily's pulse quickened. "We've got proof now," she said, gripping the phone tightly. "If we can get out of here and deliver this to someone we trust, Davis is done." Frank glanced at her, his voice calm but firm. "Proof won't mean much if we don't survive tonight." Lily nodded, her jaw tightening. She wasn't going to let fear win. Not tonight. "What's the plan?" Frank pulled a duffel bag from beneath the table and unzipped it, revealing a collection of weapons, flashbangs, and smoke grenades. "We keep them off balance. Make them think they're walking into a trap." Joe chuckled. "Let's give them a show." The men outside fanned out, their voices muffled but determined. One of them stepped forward, holding a megaphone. "Lily Carter." The voice boomed, echoing through the clearing. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Hand it over, and we might let you walk out of here alive." Lily recognized the voice. It belonged to the taller man from the diner. She clenched her fists, anger coursing through her veins. "They think I'm going to hand it over," she muttered. "Not a chance." Frank smirked. "Good. They'll underestimate us." He handed Lily a small earpiece and slipped one into his own ear. "We'll split up. Joe, take the left side. I'll cover the back. Lily, stay here. Use the smoke grenades if they get too close." "I'm not hiding," Lily said firmly. Frank raised an eyebrow. "Kid, this isn't about proving yourself. It's about staying alive long enough to make a difference." Lily hesitated but nodded. "Fine. Just be careful." Frank and Joe disappeared into the shadows, leaving Lily alone in the cabin. She took a deep breath and steadied her hands, forcing herself to focus. The phone was in her jacket pocket, and she wouldn't let anyone take it, not without a fight. The first flash of gunfire erupted outside, sharp cracks cutting through the night. Lily ducked behind the table, her heart racing as shouts filled the air. "Left side." Joe's voice crackled through the earpiece. Two moving toward the cabin. Lily peered out the window and saw two men creeping through the trees, their rifles raised. She grabbed a smoke grenade from the bag, pulled the pin, and rolled it toward the door. A plume of thick, gray smoke erupted, obscuring their view. The men shouted in confusion, their movements becoming frantic. Lily seized the opportunity, slipping out the back door and circling around the cabin. The smoke gave her cover, but her every step felt like it echoed through the forest. She spotted one of the men through the haze, his silhouette barely visible. He turned, raising his weapon, but before he could fire, a deafening crack rang out. He collapsed, and Lily saw Frank emerging from the shadows, his rifle steady. "Keep moving," he called to her. Lily nodded, adrenaline surging through her. She ran toward the treeline, determined to create distance between herself and the attackers. The phone in her pocket felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Meanwhile, Joe had taken cover behind a fallen tree, his shotgun leveled at two men advancing toward him. He fired, the blast sending one of them sprawling. The second man dove for cover, returning fire. Joe ducked as bullets splintered the wood around him. "Lily," Joe barked into his earpiece. "They're regrouping. You need to get out of here now." "I'm not leaving you," she shouted back. Joe gritted his teeth. "You've got the evidence. That's what matters. Go." Before Lily could respond, the sound of tires screeching reached her ears. She turned and saw another truck barreling into the clearing, its headlights sweeping over the chaos. More men jumped out, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. "They brought reinforcements," Frank said, his voice grim. "We're running out of time." Lily's chest tightened. She couldn't keep running forever. She needed to act, to turn the tide before it was too late. Then she saw it, a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods. If she could get to higher ground, she might be able to signal for help or at least buy them time. "Frank, Joe," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. "I'm heading up the ridge. Keep them busy." "Be careful, kid," Joe replied. "We'll hold them as long as we can." Lily sprinted up the trail, her legs burning with every step. The sound of gunfire and shouting faded behind her, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She reached the top of the ridge and pulled out her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. The call connected on the second ring. "State Police," a voice answered. "This is Lily Carter," she said, her breath coming in gasps. "I have evidence of corruption and organized crime in Willow Creek. I'm under attack. I need help." "Where are you?" the voice asked, urgency creeping into their tone. Lily gave her location, her eyes scanning the darkness below. She could see flashlights moving through the trees, the attackers closing in. She ended the call and tucked the phone back into her pocket, her heart pounding. Help was on the way, but would it arrive in time? She gripped a branch for balance, her eyes narrowing as the first of the men emerged from the trail below. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Lily crouched at the top of the ridge, her breathing shallow as the flashlights below moved closer. She gripped a large branch she'd found on the ground, her only weapon for the moment. The stolen phone with the incriminating evidence pressed against her chest and her jacket pocket, a lifeline and a target all at once. She peered down the trail. 3 men were advancing, their boots crunching on the loose gravel. They moved cautiously, rifles at the ready, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Lily's mind raced. She had to slow them down until help arrived. She couldn't let them corner her here. Her gaze fell on a pile of loose rocks near the edge of the ridge. An idea formed in her mind. Quietly, she crept over to the rocks, careful not to dislodge any prematurely. She waited until the men were directly below her. Then she shoved. The pile of rocks tumbled down the slope with a deafening roar, smashing branches and kicking up dirt. The men shouted in alarm, diving for cover as the avalanche of debris barreled toward them. One lost his footing and slid down the trail, his flashlight spinning out of his hand and into the brush. Lily didn't wait to see the damage. She turned and sprinted deeper into the woods, her heart pounding. The ridge narrowed as she ran, forcing her to stick to a winding path that edged dangerously close to the cliffside. Behind her, the remaining men cursed and shouted, their footsteps closing in. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Just keep moving." Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Joe and Frank were holding their ground. The attackers had regrouped and were circling the perimeter, firing sporadically to keep them pinned down. Joe crouched behind an overturned table, his shotgun at the ready. Frank was positioned near a window, his rifle trained on the clearing. "They're trying to flush us out," Frank muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "They don't know we're down to our last few shots." Joe smirked. "Let's make them count." A shadow moved near the tree. Frank squeezed the trigger, and the sharp crack of his rifle split the night. The shadow fell, but another immediately took its place. Joe fired a warning shot, forcing the group to retreat momentarily. "You think Lily's okay?" Joe asked, reloading his shotgun. Frank nodded. "She's tough. If anyone can outrun these guys, it's her." Joe glanced out the window, his jaw tightening. "She'd better. We're running out of time." On the ridge, Lily's situation was growing more desperate. The men were relentless, their shouts getting closer with every passing second. She stumbled on a root, barely catching herself before tumbling over the edge. The steep drop to the rocky riverbank below was a sobering reminder of how high she'd climbed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She ducked behind a large boulder and pulled it out. It was a text from the state police dispatcher she'd called earlier. "Help en route. ETA 10 minutes. Hold tight." Lily's relief was short-lived. 10 minutes might as well have been an eternity. She peeked around the boulder and saw one of the men emerging from the trees. He was closer than she'd realized, his rifle gleaming in the moonlight. "You're cornered, Carter," he shouted, his voice cutting through the silence. "Hand over the phone, and we might let you live." Lily tightened her grip on the branch, her mind racing. She had one chance to take him out before the others arrived. She waited until he stepped closer, his flashlight sweeping over the ground. Then she lunged. The branch struck his wrist, sending the rifle clattering to the ground. He shouted in pain, swinging wildly at her. Lily ducked, using the branch to jab him in the stomach. He doubled over, and she delivered a swift kick to his leg, knocking him off balance. He hit the ground hard, groaning as he tried to crawl toward his rifle. Lily didn't give him the chance. She grabbed the weapon and tossed it over the edge of the cliff, the sound of it crashing into the rocks below echoing through the night. Before she could catch her breath, a second man appeared, his flashlight blinding her. "Got her," he yelled. Lily turned and ran, the sound of footsteps pounding behind her. The trail narrowed further, forcing her closer to the edge. Her lungs burned, her legs screaming for her to stop, but she pushed on. The phone in her pocket felt heavier with every step, the weight of the truth she carried keeping her going. Then she saw it, a small clearing ahead, with a lone tree standing near the cliff's edge. If she could reach it, she might have a chance to make a stand. She burst into the clearing and turned to face her pursuers. The 2 men emerged moments later, their rifles raised. The taller one sneered, his flashlight illuminating her face. "End of the line," he said. "Give us the phone, or we'll take it off your corpse." Lily's chest tightened, but she refused to let them see her fear. She took a step back, her heels teetering on the edge of the cliff. "You want it? Come and get it." The taller man hesitated, his eyes flicking to the drop behind her. The other man raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a deafening roar filled the air. Bright lights swept over the clearing, and the whir of helicopter blades drowned out the shouts of the attackers. The state police had arrived. "Drop your weapons," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "You're surrounded." The men froze, their eyes darting between Lily and the approaching helicopters. Realizing they were outnumbered, they dropped their rifles and raised their hands. Lily sank to her knees, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Tears pricked her eyes as the police descended, cuffing the attackers and securing the area. One of the officers approached her, his expression concerned. "Are you Lily Carter?" he asked. She nodded, her voice trembling. "I have the evidence. It's all here." The officer took the phone and gave her a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. We'll take it from here." But as Lily watched the helicopters lift off with the captured men, she knew it wasn't over. Chief Davis was still out there, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. This was just the beginning, and she was ready. The quiet hum of the police cruiser's engine was a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. Lily sat in the back seat, her jacket still damp from the rain, her hands trembling despite the warmth of the heater. The officer driving glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his face a mix of concern and admiration. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "Most people wouldn't have made it out of that." Lily forced a small smile, though her mind was elsewhere. "I didn't have a choice. If I stopped, they would have won." The cruiser pulled into a secured lot outside the state police headquarters, a modern building that seemed far removed from the small-town corruption she'd been fighting. As the officer helped her out of the car, she clutched the borrowed coat she'd been given, her fingers brushing against the empty pocket where the phone had been. The evidence was now in the hands of the state police, but her work was far from over. A detective named Martinez met her at the entrance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a no-nonsense demeanor and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Lily Carter?" he asked, extending a hand. "Yes," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm but not overbearing. "I'm Detective Martinez. I'll be leading the investigation from here. We've already started reviewing the data on the phone you provided." "It's extensive." "Good," Lily said, her voice firm, "because Chief Davis isn't going to stop. If he finds out the evidence is in your hands, he'll come after all of us." Martinez nodded. "We're aware of the risks. That's why we're taking this seriously. But I need you to walk us through everything. How you got the phone, what you know about Davis and anyone else who might be involved." Lily's stomach tightened. Reliving the events of the past few days wasn't something she wanted to do, but if it meant bringing Davis to justice, she'd face it head-on. "I'll tell you everything." Inside the interrogation room, Lily sat across from Martinez and another detective, a younger woman named Parker who scribbled notes on a pad. The room was stark, with white walls and a single overhead light. Lily recounted everything. Her suspicions about the burglaries, the chief's dismissal of her findings, the discovery of the car at the riverfront, and the terrifying encounters at the mill and the cabin. Martinez listened intently, occasionally interrupting to ask clarifying questions. When Lily mentioned the messages on the phone, his expression darkened. "HD," he repeated. "That lines up with what we've seen in the texts. Davis has been coordinating with someone referred to as Boss. We're still piecing together who that might be." Lily frowned. "It's not Davis?" Martinez shook his head. "Davis is involved, but from what we've seen, he's not the mastermind. He's taking orders. The Boss seems to be running an organized ring. Burglary, smuggling, and possibly worse." Lily's chest tightened. The idea that Davis wasn't the end of the chain only deepened the danger she was in. "So what now?" "We build the case," Parker said, finally looking up from her notes. "And we take them down. But we're going to need your help." The next few days passed in a blur. Lily was moved to a safe house under constant surveillance, her every move monitored by the state police. Despite the security, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow outside the window sent her heart racing. She spent hours poring over the evidence the state police had compiled. It was worse than she'd imagined. The burglary ring was just the surface. The group was tied to illegal shipments moving through Willow Creek, drugs, stolen goods, and even weapons. Davis had been orchestrating the local operations, but the orders were coming from someone higher up. One night, as she sat at the safe house's small dining table, Martinez walked in, carrying a thick file. "We found something you need to see." He laid the file in front of her, flipping it open to reveal a series of surveillance photos. One showed Davis meeting with a man outside a warehouse. The man was tall, with sharp features and a scar running down his left cheek. "This is the boss," Martinez said. "Name's Victor Kane. He's been running organized crime operations across the state for years. Davis is just one of many on his payroll." Lily stared at the photo, anger boiling in her chest. "And you think Kane ordered Davis to cover up the burglaries?" Martinez nodded. "It fits the pattern. Kane uses local enforcers like Davis to keep his operations under the radar. But with the evidence you provided, we have enough to issue a warrant for Davis's arrest. Once we have him, we can use his testimony to go after Kane." A chill ran down Lily's spine. She'd always suspected Davis of corruption, but knowing he was part of something so much larger made it even harder to stomach. "So what's the plan?" "We bring Davis in quietly," Martinez said. "If he knows we're coming, he'll run. Or worse, he'll come after you." The operation was set for the following morning. The state police planned to arrest Davis at his home, far from the station where he might have allies. Lily wasn't part of the raid, but Martinez assured her she'd be informed as soon as Davis was in custody. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She paced the small, safe house, her mind replaying every encounter she'd had with Davis. The way he dismissed her, humiliated her, and ultimately betrayed her trust. She'd thought of him as a mentor, someone who could guide her in her career. Now, she realized he'd only seen her as a threat. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe? Think again." Lily's blood ran cold. She looked around the room, her heart pounding. The safe house was supposed to be secure, but this message proved otherwise. She called Martinez immediately. "They know where I am," she said, her voice trembling. "They just sent me a message." "Stay where you are," Martinez said firmly. "We're sending a team now." But before Lily could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached her ears. Headlights swept across the windows, and the unmistakable silhouette of a car pulled up outside. They had found her. This time, there was no running. Lily's breath caught as she stared at the headlights outside the window. The sound of car doors slamming echoed in the still night air. Shadows moved through the beams of light, their figures tall and deliberate. They had come for her. Her mind raced. The safe house wasn't fortified like the cabin had been. She had no weapons, no plan, and only a handful of state police officers en route. For all their assurances, help wasn't going to arrive fast enough. The phone buzzed in her hand again. Another message from the unknown number. "This ends tonight." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She couldn't let panic consume her. Taking a deep breath, she scanned the room. There was a small kitchen in the corner, its drawers full of utensils. A heavy chair stood by the door, and the safe house's single window led to a wooded area beyond. She might not have much, but she wasn't entirely defenseless. The sound of boots crunching gravel grew louder, followed by a sharp knock on the front door. "Lily Carter," a deep voice called. "We know you're in there. Open up, and no one has to get hurt." Lily didn't respond. She grabbed a kitchen knife from a drawer and backed into the shadows near the door. Her hands trembled, but her grip was firm. She wasn't going to give in without a fight. Another knock, harder this time. "We're not asking again." Then came the crash. The door splintered as a shoulder slammed into it. Lily braced herself, her heart racing as the first man stepped inside. He was tall and muscular, dressed in dark clothes with a pistol drawn. His eyes scanned the room, narrowing as he moved further in. Lily waited until his back was turned, then lunged, slamming the knife into his arm. He yelled in pain, dropping his weapon as he stumbled back. Lily grabbed the chair and swung it with all her strength, knocking him to the ground. The second man burst in, his gun raised. Lily dove behind the table as a shot rang out, the bullet shattering a glass lamp. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she grabbed the first man's fallen pistol, her fingers fumbling to grip it properly. She wasn't trained for this, but survival instincts took over. The second man moved closer, his flashlight beam sweeping the room. Lily stayed low, her breaths shallow. When he stepped into view, she didn't hesitate. She fired, the recoil jolting her arm. The bullet struck his shoulder, and he cried out, dropping to one knee. "Don't move," Lily shouted, her voice shaking but firm. "Drop the gun, or the next one's worse." The man glared at her but complied, his weapon clattering to the floor. Before Lily could secure him, a third figure appeared in the doorway, a man she recognized immediately. Chief Davis. Her stomach twisted at the sight of him, his once familiar face now twisted into a cold sneer. He held a pistol, but it wasn't aimed at her. He simply stood there, his expression unreadable. "Lily," he said, his voice calm. "You've caused quite a mess." She kept her pistol trained on the injured man, her eyes darting to Davis. "You're the one behind all of this. You betrayed the badge." Davis chuckled, stepping further into the room. "Betrayed? No. I simply saw an opportunity. The system is broken, Lily. It's rotten to the core. I didn't create that. I just learned how to survive in it. By hurting people?" Lily spat. "By lying to the people who trusted you?" He shrugged. "You're naive if you think justice is that simple. The world doesn't work the way you want it to. But it's not too late, Lily. You're smart, resourceful. Join me, and you won't have to struggle anymore." Lily's grip on the pistol tightened. "I'd rather die than become like you." Davis's face hardened. "Then I guess we're at an impasse." Before he could raise his gun, the sound of sirens filled the air. Blue and red lights flashed outside as state police vehicles screeched to a halt. Davis's composure cracked for the first time, his jaw tightening as officers swarmed the property. "Drop the weapon," a voice boomed from outside. Davis turned back to Lily, his eyes cold. "This isn't over." Then, in a move so fast she barely registered it, he tossed his pistol to the floor and raised his hands. The state police stormed in, their rifles trained on him. Martinez was among them, his expression grim as he barked orders to secure the scene. Lily lowered her weapon, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Martinez approached her, his gaze softening. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her legs felt like they might give out beneath her. "Davis, he admitted everything. He tried to get me to join him." Martinez nodded. "We've got enough to bring him down. Between the phone and your testimony, he's finished." As the officers cuffed Davis and let him out, he glanced back at Lily, a faint smirk on his lips. "You're playing a dangerous game, rookie. Don't think for a second this ends with me." Lily held his gaze, her voice steady despite the weight of his words. "You're right. It doesn't end with you. It ends when every last one of you is behind bars." For the first time, Davis's confidence wavered. He turned away, disappearing into the night with the officers. Lily sank into a chair, her body finally relaxing. Martinez sat across from her, his expression serious. "You did good, Carter. Better than most would have." She looked up at him, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not over. Not until the boss is taken down." Martinez nodded. "And we'll get him. But for now, you've earned a rest." Lily wasn't so sure about that. The fight had taken everything she had, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't stopping until justice was served. The ride back to the state police headquarters was quiet, except for the faint chatter on the police radio. Lily stared out the window, watching the dark countryside roll by. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But her mind refused to rest. Davis might be in custody, but the man he worked for, Victor Kane, was still out there. The car pulled into the secure lot, and Martinez opened her door. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "We've arranged a secure room for you. No one gets in or out without clearance." Lily stepped out, nodding. "Thanks. But what's next? What's the plan for Kane?" Martinez gave her a tired smile. "We're working on it. With Davis in custody, we've got a direct line to Kane's operations. If Davis cooperates, we might get enough to move on Kane soon. If..." Lily repeated, her tone sharp. Davis isn't the type to cooperate. He's loyal to himself first and Kane second. He's not going to flip without a fight. Martinez shrugged. Everyone has a breaking point. Lily wasn't convinced. She followed him inside, the brightly lit hallways of the headquarters feeling cold and impersonal. A young officer escorted her to a small room with a single bed and a desk. She sank onto the mattress, the events of the past days weighing heavily on her. Before the officer left, he handed her a folder. Detective Martinez thought you'd want to see this. Lily opened it as soon as the door clicked shut. Inside were more details about Kane. His rise to power, his network of criminal enterprises, and the key players in his organization. The deeper she read, the more her anger burned. Kane was ruthless, his operations spanning multiple states. He used people like Davis as pawns, ensuring his hands stayed clean while others took the fall. She flipped to the last page and froze. There, in a grainy surveillance photo, was Kane standing with Davis. But it wasn't the photo that made her blood run cold. It was the man standing behind them. Joe. Lily stared at the photo, her mind spinning. Joe had been with her every step of the way. He'd protected her, fought beside her. He couldn't be part of this. But the photo told a different story. Joe was standing just behind Kane, his posture relaxed, as if he belonged there. Her chest tightened. Could it be a coincidence? A misunderstanding? She tried to remember everything Joe had said, every look, every action. He had seemed genuine, but had it all been a lie? Had he been feeding Kane information this entire time? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Martinez. Carter, we've got a problem, he said, his voice tense. Davis isn't talking. No surprise there, Lily replied, her tone bitter. He's loyal to Kane. That's not all, Martinez continued. We think someone tipped off Kane about Davis's arrest. We've got chatter that he's moving his operations, shutting down warehouses, moving goods, erasing evidence. Lily gripped the phone tighter. You think Davis tipped him off? Maybe, Martinez said. Or maybe someone else in his network did. Either way, if we don't act fast, we'll lose our chance to bring Kane down. Lily hesitated. She wanted to tell Martinez about the photo, about Joe, but she needed to be sure. If she was wrong, accusing Joe could ruin the only genuine connection she had left in this fight. I'll help, she said finally. Whatever you need. We've tracked one of Kane's warehouses to the industrial district on the east side of Willow Creek, Martinez said. We're mobilizing a team to raid it tonight. Be ready. I will, Lily said, ending the call. She stared at the photo again, doubt gnawing at her. If Joe was involved, he'd know about the warehouse. He might even warn Kane. But if she was wrong, confronting him could cost her a valuable ally. Either way, she needed to find out. Later that evening, Lily found herself in the back of another unmarked police car, heading toward the industrial district. Martinez had arranged for her to be part of the operation, insisting her knowledge of Davis and Kane's network would be invaluable. The car pulled up near the warehouse, a sprawling structure surrounded by chain-link fences and dimly lit by flickering floodlights. Officers were already in position, their black uniforms blending into the shadows. Martinez approached her, his expression serious. We've got confirmation there's activity inside. Trucks are being loaded. This could be a major score. What's the plan? Lily asked. We'll breach from 3 sides, Martinez explained. You stay with me. Your job is to identify anything that links this place to Kane or Davis. Got it? Lily nodded, her heart pounding. Got it. The team moved swiftly, cutting through the fence and approaching the warehouse in silence. Lily stayed close to Martinez, her pulse racing as they reached the building's side entrance. Martinez signaled, and one of the officers kicked the door open. The team stormed inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior was a maze of stacked crates and buzzing machinery. Shouts erupted as workers scrambled to flee, but the officers quickly secured the area. Lily's eyes scanned the scene, searching for anything that might connect this place to Kane. She spotted a desk in the corner and made her way over, her heart sinking as she opened a drawer and found a stack of documents. They were shipping manifests, each one bearing the same signature at the bottom. Victor Kane? I've got something, she called to Martinez, holding up the papers. But before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the warehouse. Lily turned just in time to see a familiar figure step out from behind a stack of crates. Joe. Her blood ran cold as their eyes met. He wasn't armed, but his expression was guarded, his hands raised slightly in mock surrender. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I could ask you the same," Joe said, his tone calm. "But I guess you've figured it out by now." The weight of the photo, the suspicion, the betrayal, all of it crashed down on her at once. "You were working with Kane this whole time," Joe sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It's not that simple, Lily. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," she snapped, her grip tightening on her flashlight. "You lied to me. You used me." "No," Joe said firmly. "I protected you. If I hadn't been there, you'd already be dead." Before Lily could respond, more footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Kane's men were here, and the fight wasn't over yet. The echo of heavy boots against the concrete sent a chill down Lily's spine. The dimly lit warehouse seemed to shrink as the sound grew louder. Joe stood a few feet away, his hands still raised, his face an unreadable mask. Behind her, Martinez barked orders to his team, their movements sharp and deliberate as they spread out to intercept the incoming threat. "You need to trust me," Joe said, his voice low but steady. "This isn't the time for accusations." Lily stared at him, her mind racing. "Trust you? After everything? You've been lying to me this whole time." Joe shook his head, his voice urgent. "It's not that simple. Yes, I worked with Kane, but it wasn't by choice. He has a way of making sure you either play along or disappear. I played along to survive, and to stop him from finding you." Lily's heart pounded, her grip tightening on the flashlight. "Why should I believe you now?" Joe took a step closer, his hands still raised. "Because if I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it a long time ago. Instead, I kept you alive. I led you to the right places, didn't I? I wanted you to uncover the truth, to take Kane down. But if you don't trust me now, you'll lose everything." Before Lily could respond, a shout rang out from across the warehouse. "They're here," Martinez called, his voice sharp. "Get to cover." Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks reverberating off the metal walls. Lily ducked behind a stack of crates, her breath coming in short bursts. Joe crouched beside her, his expression grim. "You can hate me later," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Right now, we need to survive." Lily hesitated, her instincts warring with her emotions. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she couldn't deny that he'd been protecting her, at least in part. And right now, she needed every ally she could get. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But if you're lying—" "I'm not," Joe interrupted. "Let's move." The firefight raged as Lily and Joe weaved through the maze of crates, bullets ricocheting off the metal. Martinez and his team held their ground, their disciplined movements forcing Kane's men to retreat deeper into the warehouse. Lily could see the desperation on their faces. They were losing control. "Over there." Joe pointed to a metal staircase leading to a raised office overlooking the warehouse floor. "That's where Kane will be." Lily nodded, her determination outweighing her fear. She followed Joe up the staircase, her muscles screaming in protest with every step. As they reached the top, she saw him, Victor Kane. He was standing by a desk, calmly packing a briefcase as though the chaos below didn't concern him. His sharp features were even more menacing in person, the scar on his cheek catching the dim light. When he noticed them, he smiled. Well, Kane said, his voice smooth and cold. "Lily Carter, the rookie who turned out to be a real problem. Your problem's about to end," Lily shot back, raising her pistol. Kane's smile didn't falter. "Do you really think you're going to stop me? I've built an empire. One little cop isn't going to bring it down." "You're wrong," Lily said, stepping closer. "I've already torn it apart. Davis is in custody. Your warehouses are being raided. It's over." Kane's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won? Even if you take me down, there are others. People more powerful than you can imagine. They'll keep this going." Lily's grip on her pistol tightened, But before she could respond, Joe stepped forward. No, Kane. It ends tonight. Kane turned his gaze to Joe, his smile returning. Ah, my loyal friend. Betraying me, are you? I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Loyalty is such a fragile thing. Joe didn't flinch. Loyalty isn't following orders blindly. It's doing the right thing, even when it's hard. And the right thing is stopping you. Kane's smile disappeared. His hand darted to his side, pulling a hidden pistol from his waistband. Before he could aim, Lily fired. The shot hit his shoulder, and he staggered back, dropping the weapon with a shout of pain. It's over, Lily said, stepping closer, her gun trained on him. You're done. Kane glared at her, his jaw clenched. You don't have the guts. Try me, Lily said, her voice steady. Get on the ground. Now. The sound of heavy boots echoed up the staircase as Martinez and his team arrived, their weapons trained on Kane. He hesitated, his eyes darting between Lily and the approaching officers, before finally dropping to his knees. Martinez cuffed him, his expression hard. Victor Kane, you're under arrest for conspiracy, smuggling, and organized crime. As the officers led Kane away, Lily lowered her pistol, the weight of the moment hitting her all at once. She turned to Joe, who was leaning against the desk, his expression unreadable. Why did you help me? She asked, her voice softer now. Joe sighed. Because you reminded me of who I used to be. I got caught up in Kane's world, and I lost myself. You gave me a chance to make it right. Lily studied him for a moment, then nodded. You'll have to answer for what you've done. Joe gave her a sad smile. I know. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and paperwork. Kane's arrest made headlines, and Davis's testimony confirmed the extent of the operation. Dozens of arrests followed, dismantling Kane's empire piece by piece. Lily stood in front of the Willow Creek Police Department, looking up at the familiar building. She wasn't a rookie anymore. Not in skill, not in resolve. She'd learned that justice wasn't easy, and it wasn't always black and white. But it was worth fighting for. Martinez walked up beside her, a faint smile on his face. What's next for you, Carter? Lily smiled, a spark of determination in her eyes. There's still work to do, and I'm not stopping until it's done. As she stepped inside, the weight of the past weeks lifted slightly. She'd faced betrayal, danger, and the darkest sides of human nature. But she'd also found her strength, and that was just the beginning.